Welcome back to The World Over. Here's the latest news on immigration and migration. Capitol Hill Democrats and Republicans are searching for a breakthrough on immigration after President Donald Trump jump-started talks at the White House on Tuesday. At the top of the list, a legislative fix for Daca, the Obama-era directive that protected some 800,000 illegal immigrant minors from deportation. President Trump encouraged Congress to get a deal done and said the deal should be a bipartisan bill of love.
So I'm appealing to everyone in the room to put the country before a party and to sit down and negotiate and to compromise. I think it's very important. You're talking about 800,000 people, and you're talking about lots of other people are also affected, including people that live in our country. That's from the security standpoint.
Besides Daca, lawmakers have agreed to constrain the immediate immigration negotiations to securing the border, family-based chain migration, and the visa lottery system. The White House has since said that there will not be a Daca deal unless there's also funding for Trump's long-promised wall on the southern border. And he just rejected today a bipartisan deal. So they're back to the drawing boards. Meanwhile, President Trump is rueing the decision of a federal judge who temporarily blocked the administration's decision to end Daca. U.S. District Judge William Alsup of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals granted a request by California and other plaintiffs while their lawsuits play out. Trump took a shot at the court on Twitter, saying the decision shows how broken and unfair our court system is. The opposing side in a case such as Daca always runs to the Ninth Circuit and almost always wins before being reversed by higher courts. End quote. Daca is set to expire in March, pending court actions. And migration policy was not lost in Pope Francis's wide-ranging foreign policy speech to diplomats at the Vatican on Monday. He warned against rhetoric about migrants and migration that only stir up primal fears. And he said that the freedom of movement to leave one's homeland and to return is a fundamental human right. More broadly, the Pope decried that many fundamental rights continue to be violated, first among them, the rights to life, liberty, and personal security. He said that war, violence, and abortion all infringe on these rights. The Pope touched on hot spots around the world, and no controversial policy was spared in his nearly hour-long address. The Pope urged the rebuilding of trust on the Korean Peninsula and in Syria. He called for serious efforts for nuclear disarmament, respecting commitments made in Paris, their agreement on global warming, and an effort to help all refugees, particularly Christians, to return to their homeland. Here to discuss immigration policy and the Catholic response is the Senior Director of International Migration Policy at the Center for Migration Studies and former USCCB Director of Migration Policy, Kevin Appleby. And next to him is Resident Fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies, Andrew Arthur. Kevin, Andrew, thank you both for being here. I want to start with the bishops who have come down very firmly on the side of the dreamers, these 800,000 or so unaccompanied minors brought into the country by their parents, now facing an uncertain future. President Obama, by executive order, created a plan to defer their leaving the country. President Trump overturned that, but gave Congress 6 months to come up with a legislative fix. Now we read this from Bishop Vasquez. He writes, "As a nation, we have a moral and humanitarian obligation to dreamers." Do we have an obligation to dreamers or to the citizens of the country that these people serve? Kevin Appleby.
Well, first of all, the bishops aren't alone in supporting the dreamers. 80 to 85% of Americans support allowing the dreamers to stay. And when he says we have a moral obligation, we're talking about kids that came here not on their own volition. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't knowingly break the law. They don't know the countries that they would be sent back to. And many of the countries they would go back to are unable to have the opportunities they have in the United States. They're also contributing. They have jobs, they're contributing, they're leaders, they're getting their schooling. It's in our best interest and their best interest to allow them to get a path to citizenship.
Andrew, your take.
It's definitely a sympathetic population of individuals. At the same time, there are also individuals who are competing with the least privileged members of our own society, citizens and lawful aliens alike, for jobs. Quite frankly, most of these folks don't have most of these underprivileged people don't have the same good Jesuit education that my parents paid for, and they are the ones who are actually going to pay the price in terms of lower wages and lessen job opportunities when competing against this population.
I want to move on and talk about a possible Daca fix. The president laid out a plan earlier this week, and he said he was not going to accept anything that didn't include funding of his wall. We'll roll that bite for you now.
I really believe they're going to come up with a solution to the DACA problem, which has been going on for a long time, and maybe beyond that, immigration as a whole. But any solution has to include the wall, because without the wall, it all doesn't work.
Your reaction, Kevin Appleby?
Well, first of all, the president is holding these kids hostage over a border wall, which probably won't ever be built. It's not a 2,000-mile wall that he's talking about. It's like various spots along the border where you may need some barriers, you may need some wall, but frankly, you need a mix of things: surveillance, boots on the ground, really to secure the border, not to create a wall throughout 2,000 miles. Really, he's just trying to honor a pledge he made during the campaign. Mm-hmm. It's not the best policy for the country. It's not going to necessarily stop illegal immigration or the drug trade, and it's really expensive.
Now, the acting ICE director said something different, and Andrew, I want you to react to this. Thomas Holman, who's the acting ICE director, he said every place that built the wall, whether it's San Diego, whether it's eastern San Diego County, Yuma, Arizona, El Paso, every place, 100% of the time where they built a wall or a barrier, numbers went down. It is shown it works. Why wouldn't we not want to build a wall to protect national security and public safety?
And I couldn't agree with Acting Director Holman more. The fact is that vast stretches of the border are completely unsecure and need barriers of some sort in order to prevent the flow of individuals and the flow of drugs and guns across that border.
Can I?
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, immigration across the border is at its lowest point since the Nixon administration.
Right.
Even Trump says that.
Yep.
So what the issue is people overstaying their visas. It's getting to a point where people overstaying their visas is exceeding the numbers coming across the border. And on the wall comment...
There's also no incentive to come across the border, which there was during the previous administration. Trump, by being so vocal, I mean, he did kind of... The incentives are removed, and people know if you come in, you're going to be deported. So there's perhaps not the incentive or the willingness to go across the border.
Well, if the fact is that a large number of the individuals who get caught entering the United States illegally across the border in the United States apply for credible fear. They assert that they have a fear that they're going to be harmed if they're sent back to their home country. And the fact is that the vast majority of those individuals are actually found to have credible fear. Under the previous administration, they were released. And quite frankly, we just don't have the detention space right now to hold them either. So a lot of them are still being released.
Andrew's talking about the Central American crisis,
right,
which is really a shift in what's
not just Central America, but it's people from other countries. That's
where people are coming from, children and families predominantly through Central America.
Let's talk for a moment about the other part of this. The president, in rejecting, and it appears, Dick Durbin just came out and said it looks like the president has rejected the bipartisan agreement. Jeff Flake and others were part of that. Certainly no friends of the president, and they don't agree with him on this policy. But the president personally rejected whatever bipartisan deal they came forward with. A piece of that is ending chain migration. Now, a lot of people may be unclear about what chain migration is. How many people are we talking about? Why is this such a burning issue for the president and a non-negotiable for any DACA deal for him?
We determined that between 1981, we at the Center for Immigration Studies determined that between 1981 and 2016, approximately 61% of all immigrants to the United States came through chain migration. These aren't individuals who came to the United States because they had skills that the United States needed or because they brought some particular ability that would help to grow our economy and our society. Rather, they came because of who they were related to, which is an odd way to determine who gets to share in the blessings of our liberties.
Well, the argument would be you need it for family unity.
Right. I mean, this is something that the bishops and the Catholic community should easily defend, family-based immigration. It's not chain migration. What they want to do is ban families from coming in. And families...
Well, extended families. I think they're not worried about
an adult
the immediate
child,
family.
Is it extended family member?
Well,
a parent, is it extended
No,
family?
but nephews, cousins,
brothers, and sisters, adults?
Nephews and cousins aren't in the family-based immigration. That's a myth. And brothers and sisters and parents, those are immediate family members too. So, I mean, we got to get to what's really happening here. Families are economic actors too. Go into any strip mall in this country, you're going to find a business run by an immigrant family. They're contributors, and they also take care of their members, keeping them off government programs, et cetera, and they protect them.
You want to say what, Andrew?
Well, the fact is that you can, in fact, immigrate your nephew to the United States, because if your brother gets a family fourth visa, he can bring his child along with him. If your sister does, she can bring her child along with her, too. And that, quite frankly, that's the chain migration that grows. We're not talking about citizenship in the United States. A lawful permanent residence in the United States is one of the most precious commodities in the world, and certainly one of the most precious commodities that we can give. And we should be selective about who we should give it to. We should give it to individuals who have the skills and abilities to succeed in this country and to grow our economy, grow our society.
Should there be a limit on the number of people that the United States accepts legally into the country each year?
There is. I mean, there's about 900,000 green cards given out a year, depending on the categories. We can debate whether that's too much or too little. Senator Cotton wants to cut it to 500,000.
Right.
That's something we can debate on the merits or not. Immigration has been a positive for this country over several decades. We're the strongest economy in the world. We need all levels of workers, not just high-skilled workers. We're not Canada. We're not Australia. We're the largest economy in the world, and we need skilled workers of all skill levels. And if we cut off the low-skilled workers, we're going to have shortages in 20, 30 years.
Archbishop Negri, who is an Italian bishop, he gave an interview this week to Italian media, and he said uncontrolled immigration leads to crushing and extermination of our society. He went on to say, the movement seeks to normalize mass immigration because this serves the great globalized economy, one of whose objectives is to create a low-paid immigrant workforce. Isn't that a bad argument? Isn't that an argument against throwing the doors open to anyone who wants to come? Because you're forcing these people into low-paid jobs, and that is what, frankly, a lot of big business folks want.
Well, it's a myth. It's a myth that the Catholic teaching is open borders. The Catholic teaching is the sovereign has the right to control his border.
Right.
But we also need to look at the countries that they're coming from and try to help them so that people can stay in their country and support their families in dignity. It's called root causes. And the Pope says that every time he makes a migration statement, he talks about root causes. Yeah, it's not a quick fix, especially for Washington time, but it's the ultimate solution over time to stop illegal immigration.
Andrew, Arthur, you want to say what?
Well, we need to make sure that we don't accept so many people that they can't be assimilated. And we also need to make sure that we don't accept so many people that it lowers the wages and working conditions of the most vulnerable workers in the United States. It's absolutely critical.
Do you believe that, we talked about it a moment ago, that, and I keep seeing messages here, the wall is still a non-negotiable for the president on any Daca deal? What are the probabilities that it might be built and fully funded? I'll start with you, Kevin Appleby.
Well,
I mean, he's talking about 700 miles now. It's a third of the border. That's not the whole border.
He'll get something he can claim victory on. I got my border wall. But in reality, it's going to be some in border enhancements, but other types of technology surveillance that he'll get. He's not going to get a 2,000-mile wall. He won't get a 900-mile wall. He might get some wall in certain places, but I don't see him getting a full wall out of this.
Andrew?
I'm old enough that I was one of the staffers who helped to write the 2006 Secure Fence Act, which was a bipartisan bill. It used to be that once upon a time there were individuals in both parties who understood that we needed to have barriers in order to prevent the movement of human beings. I mean, smugglers are horrible people and do bad things to individuals. We want to prevent that flow of we want to provide disincentives for people to trust themselves to smugglers because they're bad people. We also need to block the flow of drugs across that border. And quite frankly, we're not just talking about people, we're talking about all kinds of bad things for the United States. Heroin comes from Mexico predominantly to the United States, and quite frankly, stopping the flow of heroin is the best thing that we can do, the greatest health care issue that we can do, improvement that we can do in the United States today.
Kevin?
Drugs come through ports of entry. I mean, they're hidden through ports of entry. And experts say that all the time. The other thing is we need to look at the workplace. I mean, we can talk about the border till we're blue in the face, but if we allow employers to hire undocumented persons, you're going to have that pull factor, and you need to provide legal pathways so that people can come in legally and fill these jobs.
So would you be supportive of the 100 7-Elevens that were raided this week by the Trump administration to check and verify that all the people there had indeed citizenship or a right to work here?
I would, if it was done in a comprehensive bill that brings people out of the shadows and creates pathways for people to come legally to work, and they can go home. But the system's so broken right now.
Yeah, but you don't really need. We don't need a comprehensive bill. There's already statutes on the books that he's enforcing now.
Absolutely, and quite frankly, we have E-Verify, which is a system by which we can verify the employment eligibility of individuals who are looking for employment in the United States. We didn't have this back in 1986 when employer sanctions took place. We have it today. It should be made mandatory in any bill.
Kevin Appleby, you talked a moment ago about the Catholic teaching being that the sovereign or the state has the right to regulate who comes, who goes, the numbers, but they do have an obligation to welcome people who are there, to not ostracize them, to not belittle them as people. And as the Pope said in his New Year's Day address, the person and persons is what we always have to keep in mind. Not legals or a group of people, but persons, and regard them as such. This week, the Trump administration announced 200,000 Salvadorans were going to be sent back home. I will read you the statement of Archbishop Gomez of Los Angeles and get both of you to react. He wrote, "We were struck this morning by news that our government was ending a vital program, temporary protective status, which has been helping more than 200,000 refugees who came to this country fleeing violence and instability in El Salvador, including some 49,000 living in California. As the U.S. bishops and other religious leaders stated last month in a letter to the acting director of Homeland Security, the country suffers from widespread housing shortages, lack of access to clean water, disease, and food insecurity as a result of the 2001 earthquakes and subsequent natural disasters." Do you support that action? The president saying to these 200,000 Salvadorans, time for you to go.
The T in TPS is temporary. It's intended to be a temporary move that protects individuals in a short term. The earthquake took place in 2001. According to the CIA fact book, El Salvador has the fourth largest economy in the region today. Quite frankly, El Salvador is able to take back those individuals, and it is a temporary measure. Here's the bigger issue, though. When you have TPS that extends for 2 decades, it's going to make it less likely for any administration, Republican or Democrat, to extend temporary protected status to another population because there's going to be political pressure to allow those individuals to remain indefinitely. When we make temporary protected status temporary, we're more likely to extend it in appropriate situations.
What would you say to that? That this was temporary. It's been 17 years, and some of these
Right.
people were fleeing the other earthquake back in the 90s. So they've been here for 20 plus years.
Oh, yeah. They're well integrated in the country. 88% are in the workforce. They have 192,000 U.S. citizen children. They're embedded in our society. Now we're saying to them, after we've told them, both administrations, Republican and Democrat, we're going to allow you to stay here. And now we're pulling the rug out from them. They have to take their kids out of school. They have to sell their houses. They have to go back to an extremely dangerous country, top 5 in murder rates, cannot receive 200,000 Salvadorans easily into their economy. They don't barely have an economy. It's a lose-lose decision because we lose their contributions. El Salvador loses their remittances. And El Salvador is a basket case as it is. It was the wrong decision.
Well, they have 19 months to do this, and they can get in line in the immigration line and file for green cards in the United States, right?
If they have basis for it, but a lot of them won't have that basis for it, either a marriage, employment type basis that they can do that, unless there's some other program.
What do you say
created.
to Andrew's argument, though, that it was a temporary protective status responding to a crisis? That crisis has now passed, and if it hasn't, the United States can't continue having people who aren't citizens.
A statute allows you to look at conditions in the country presently, and the conditions in the country do not warrant being 200,000 people being returned.
Andrew, quickly.
You could extend TPS for the reasons that TPS could be granted. And quite frankly, coffee rust, too much rain, too little rain are not actually on that list of...
Gang violence.
Gang violence isn't on that list either.
Criminal organization gang
Not on the
violence.
list either.
So we have gang violence in Virginia, though. Okay, let's not
like in El Salvador.
Okay, let's move on to Donald Trump saying that he wants a 2-step process for DACA. Now, When Donald Trump was running, I said, and I think this is going to prove true, so I'll say it again here on the show, which I don't think I've ever said. I believe, despite Donald Trump's rhetoric, he may be the first president able to get a comprehensive immigration plan through Congress. It may not be everything everybody wants on either side, but he may have the political moxie to do it. He wants a two-step process here. He said, first, give me DACA, give me the wall, end chain migration, give me E-Verify, more judges and enforcement along the border, and I'll give you that. That's phase one. Phase two, a comprehensive approach. Is that acceptable?
Well, it's sort of like Nixon going to China, right? You know, you had Trump going to immigration reform. I mean, the first phase needs to be a Daca fix. He's throwing in a lot of different things that really should be involved in phase two. Chain migration, if you want to call it that, diversity visa, legalization of the whole undocumented.
Yeah, but he has the leverage now. He needs the leverage to do those things.
Well,
he won't have it
he
later.
doesn't have the leverage because he's got a budget deal he's got to cut, and the Democrats, he needs Democratic votes. So they have to get a deal done where DACA's done, and they could maybe do some border enhancements for phase one. And let's talk about the whole rest of the bundle of issues in a comprehensive debate.
Andrew?
You know, the fact is that the devil's always in the details whenever you talk about comprehensive. You know, how broad is it going to be? Is it going to be people who got here last week? Is it only going to be people who got here 5 years ago? And the fact is that whenever you have any sort of amnesty, you inevitably have additional individuals attempting to enter the United States. Two things happen. You get a flood of people to the border and you get chain migration. So quite frankly, I would disagree with Kevin when he says that these are, extraneous factors. These are absolutely crucial to respond to the deleterious effects that you're going to have with the DACA amnesty. With respect to a bigger plan, the president is a great deal maker. That I will tell you. And I would agree with you that if anybody could get something done, he probably is, but I don't know what the parameters are going to look like.
I spoke to an advisor to the president the other day, and they told me the president was not elected to fix the DACA situation. He was elected to protect the border, protect national security, and on behalf of the American people. What's wrong with that formulation in your mind, Kevin?
Well, I think there's more to serving the best interest of the United States other than just national security. I mean, immigration.
Well, and the citizens. I mean, it is protecting your citizenry.
Oh, that's. I'm not saying that's not a priority, but I'm saying immigration is an economic advantage to our country. It's something we've had an advantage over other countries, including China, for decades.
But we let a million people in a year. It's a big number. Well, more than anywhere else in the world.
And we have the biggest economy in the world too. And these immigrant workers, they're not on the side of the road asking for handouts. They're working in the fields and other industries, service, construction, etc. They contribute. The fallacy here is that we don't provide them protections. We take their work, but we don't provide them protections, and then we scapegoat them for our problems. That's the real moral issue here.
So again, it sounds like Kevin is promoting E-Verify, and he wants to ensure that everybody who's working in the United States is doing so legally, so that we can ensure
I don't think I said that.
So that we can ensure that employers do not exploit the labor of individuals, because quite frankly, that's what happens.
What I'm advocating for is legal status for people so they have rights in the workplace. That's what I'm advocating
for. And as soon as we ensure that the population of individuals that we have in the United States is here legally, quite frankly, they're going to be able to fight for their own rights.
Okay,
that's my point.
Let's talk quickly about refugees. In 2016, there were 97,000 refugees that came into the country. By October of 2017, that number was significantly lower, 28,000. What does the prospect look like for this year under President Trump?
Grim for the refugees. It's the biggest drop in the history of the U.S. refugee program. And there's really been no rationalization for it. I mean, we've been able to resettle refugees, 80 to 90,000, for years with no problem. They've become contributing members of society. By cutting it off, he's really hurting our foreign policy in a lot of ways, because he's not sharing the burden with other countries for refugees.
Why is the president limiting the number of refugees and cutting them off in many cases from parts of the world?
Well, here's the thing. There are actually two ways that you can help refugees. One is you can resettle them in the United States, and the other is that you can provide support to them where they are, provide the food and the health care that they need, the education that the kids need in the camps, so that they can resettle quickly. Quite frankly, if we were to take the cream of the crop of the individuals who are in refugee camps in Syria or in Jordan, when Syria becomes stable again, they're no longer going to have the civil society that they need to rebuild. Bringing people to the United States is not necessarily the best thing that we can do for those refugees in the long run. A lot of them don't actually even want to come to the United States. They want to return back to their homes as quickly as they can.
How many refugees have you met, Andrew?
I've actually met quite a few. I've worked in this area for 24 years.
In refugee camps? Really?
Not in refugee camps, but no.
Well, I've been to refugee camps, and I've talked to refugees, and they're desperate people. You know, they can't go back to where they're from. They're going to get killed, and they can't stay where they are because the countries there can't support them.
Well,
Lebanon, I was just in Lebanon.
Okay.
4.5 million people in their population, 1.5 million refugees.
Right.
Can you imagine that? What that would be in the U.S.? It'd be like, 50 million people we're accepting, and we're only talking about 70 to 80,000. It's not proportionally not a high rate.
But when you look at the amount of money that it takes to resettle someone in the United States compared to the amount of money that we can send to
a region
in order to help support these
Neither
people.
of you have mentioned Trump's justification, though. His stated justification is we need to vet these people because we're concerned about who or what they might be. That's not totally unfounded, Kevin, given the Tsarnaev brothers and the other people we've seen. They may have ill intent. Not all of them, and I do think it's a misnomer to say all of these refugees are dangers to the United States. But coming from certain regions, there might be a possibility that they're radicalized or more prone to. I'm just saying that because of their religious and
the most vetted
cultural background.
Entrance into this country by far. They go through 12, 13 background checks. You go to JFK, you got people coming every day that don't go through the background checks. So let's look at this in some context.
I would strongly disagree. If Kevin knows more about refugee camps than I do, I know more about vetting than he does. I was the former acting head of the National Security Law Division at the former INS, and I know what it takes to vet individuals to come to the United States.
And are they properly vetted?
No. And quite frankly, we need more vetting, and we need to improve the vetting of the individuals. We need better intelligence.
2 years it takes some of these people. I don't know. I mean,
absolutely,
they go through a pretty strenuous process.
2 years is a long administrative process, but it's not a long vetting process because vetting is only a very small part of that.
Okay, I got to move on to this. It's critical. Kevin, you and I know the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, a big chunk of what it does with the Migration and Refugee Office that you were a part of for so many years. It's a critical job that the conference has provided to the country, and $91 million of grants annually to do that job. We also know that a lot of that money administratively helps keep the USCCB afloat. What happens? Because we have such a low number of refugees, you're not resettling or bringing into American society the number you once were. What does that do to the USCCB, just as a financial matter?
Well, I don't know the details of the financial planning or matters of the USCCB. A lot of that money gets passed through to the diocese to help. Right. And, it's like an accordion. If the numbers are low, then the staff goes down. If it's high, then the staff will increase a little bit, only to provide the services. How it impacts the USCCB as a whole, you got to talk to them.
Yeah. But it's a big hit for them. $500 and something million over 9 years. That's a big chunk to suddenly vanish, and certainly a bit of that went to administration. Would have to.
I would think some of it does. I would think the solution here is to take that part of the operations and make it a separate entity, like Catholic Charities or like Catholic Relief Services. That way, you can ensure that it's separate, and the USCCB has the pastoral function, and the operational function is separate.
Final question: there are 100 Iranian Christians who have been awaiting refugee status in the United States. They've been in Vienna. Nina Shea, who's been on the show many times, said these people are essentially facing a death sentence. This is a situation where you send them back to Iran, they're gone because of the volatile situation on the ground. Isn't it incumbent upon the administration to at least look at these situations, particularly with Christian refugees that we heard so much about during the campaign, and yet they're being lumped in as Syrians or Iranians or whatever part of the country is on the travel ban? Is that a blind spot and a problem in your mind?
Proper vetting is important for every individual that we bring to the United States, regardless of whether they're Christian or Muslim, Buddhist or Hindu. So quite frankly, if additional time is needed for vetting, vetting is necessary. And if they're in Vienna, they're out of harm's way. And
Well, they're going to be sent back soon. They're going to be they're out of time.
President Trump campaigned on the fact that he wanted to bring more Christians in. He appealed to Catholics on that. He's not doing that. He's going to have 15,000, 20,000 refugees this year. That impacts Christians as much as it does Muslims. And the Christians are still in danger, and he's not doing anything about it. So I would suggest to Catholics that are watching the show, appeal to President Trump, say, bring refugees in who are Christians as well, because they're persecuted as well, and that's what we wanted you to do, and you're not doing it.
But we already saw in the travel order that there were attacks on the president for saying that we need to bring in more Christians. So quite frankly, the courts
they turned it into a religious test.
Exactly. And although, quite frankly, as Kevin will tell you, asylum to some degree has a religious test that's associated with it.
All of the refugees, Muslim and Christian, have the same fear and same persecution. That's what determines who comes in, primarily. A refugee who's a Christian is just as deserved as a Muslim who's a Christian. But as I said, he promised to bring in more refugees who are Christians, and he's not doing it.
Well, I would make the argument those Christians are under more persecution because they're getting slammed by more sides, and that doesn't always apply to the
I'm not going to quibble with you over that.
We won't get into that. Very good. Gentlemen, thank you for the discussion. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think of all this? I'm on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo, or you can email me at worldover@ewtn.com, but I do read Twitter faster.